Hi, my name's Wendy Chung. I'm pleased to be with you to talk about OCNDS and Simons Searchlight and the data we've been gathering and what we've been learning. To be clear, I'm the principal investigator for Simons Searchlight. This is an international registry that we use to better understand rare genetic, neurogenetic conditions, and we try and do this together and reciprocally learn and share this information to help improve the lives of individuals on a day-to-day basis and to prepare for future clinical trials. This is funded by the Simons Foundation and has an amazing team, a very deep team, I'll say, behind it. And all of these services are freely available to the family groups that are part of this. So it's an incredible group that you have powered behind you. The goals of Simons Searchlight, as I said, are to be able to, I think of this as being able to improve the care for individuals today while working towards improved treatments in tomorrow. And those improved treatments could be things like just being able to have clinical care guidelines that guide us in terms of being able to recognize things early and preemptively address them. It helps researchers in terms of being able to give them access to de-identified data that will help inform their research studies. Those researchers could be at universities, but they also could be at companies that are trying to develop new treatments, be they medicines, devices, even genetic therapies, but it's all to try and take your contribution and multiply it by distributing it to many more people to be able to get more work done, hopefully faster and more efficiently. Today is an example of what we try and do with this, which is to share this information back with you to be able to help you, your doctors, your teachers, those who are working with your family to be able to improve lives today. But we realize that this takes time. In many cases, it takes years, and I know that's hard to be patient for that, but we really are trying to do this around the world for as many people as possible and not to leave anyone behind. Your condition is one of several conditions, and as we learn about other conditions as well, the advantage is to feed that information, even if it's about other rare neurogenetic conditions, but one that may share similarities with OCNDS. So this is part of a larger effort within the Simons Foundation. This is Simons Searchlight. We also have a very large study called SPARK, which is aimed at diagnosing individuals with autism with very specific genetic conditions, and those individuals, once identified, feed into Simons Searchlight. SPARK has many other goals as well beyond just that, but that's the one that's most relevant here. And then another study that we have, which thankfully doesn't happen very often, but when individuals with an autism diagnosis die, to be able to take brain tissue at autopsy to be able to inform research studies. And then the Simons Foundation also, as I'll get into, provides induced pluripotential stem cells, and more importantly, perhaps provides funding to researchers who are working on conditions in Simons Searchlight like OCNDS. As I was alluding to, this is part of a larger community, and OCNDS, or the gene shown with the highlight here, CSNK2A1 is the gene, and that's one of many genes that we study under Simons Searchlight, and importantly, support many different languages and are continuing to increase the number of languages to make sure that internationally we're bringing the community together. As we do this, all of this is able to be done remotely, and I hope in the future we'll be doing more in person. We've done some in person before, but I hope we'll do even more of that, as well as in the future, I hope we'll be able to do some novel outcome measures, some new things that will be helpful in clinical trial readiness. Right now, what we have, I'm showing in the table, is that this is not a one and done study. This is meant to be longitudinal or following people on an annual basis so that we can understand how things change over the life course. And as I'll talk about, that's really important because I think we're just in the very early stages of learning about this condition and mostly understand about what happens in children and young children in particular. So how do we do that? At baseline or at the time of entry, and I know this takes a lot of time, it doesn't all have to be done at once. It can be done in pieces and coming back later. But this is done the first year when you join. And in doing this, it's about understanding both medical issues, some cases, understanding medicines and how effective medicines are or not, as well as understanding some of the key features. And I'll highlight epilepsy and sleep as being two of the features with OCNDS that we study. And then also, as I said, being able to do a subset of those over time. And that's because some of these issues change over time. In particular, some of the behavioral issues with OCNDS change over time. And in particular, during adolescence, this is a time when the body changes, when children are hormones are changing, their body is developing, their brain is changing as well in terms of some of these behavioral issues. And so over the life course, there are different challenges, and that's part of what we need to think through. As we do this, as I said, a key initial feature is about the medical issues, and as I'll get to it in just a second. But just to say that for those of you who have listened to me before, there's not anything strikingly new that we've seen for OCNDS based on some previous updates that I've given to the team, but I will give you some of those updates today. So far, this continues to be a neurodevelopmental condition. And as far as we can tell so far, it is not a neurodegenerative condition. But again, we want to look at that over time to make sure that individuals continue to make positive gains and not have significant losses. In doing this, as I said, it may be helpful when you're doing that medical history if there are details that you can't recall. If you do happen to have any baby books, medical records, things to pull up on your phone. It helps to make it more accurate, but it doesn't have to be absolutely detailed, that you go back and take hours and hours on end to do the medical history. It's designed that hopefully it takes you an hour or two in terms of being able to do that. For those of you who may have registered before, I'll say that you have a dashboard to be able to log back into, and that tells you what you need to do and what's next in terms of doing this. The lab test report initially, and I'll show you the workflow in just a second, helps us to confirm that your child or your family member really has OCNDS. We want to make sure you have the right diagnosis for your own journey, as well as to make sure the data that we're collecting is applicable to the community. And once we've confirmed that, you're on your way in terms of being able to do the medical history questionnaire. With this, as I said, we have slightly different things for different individuals. So if you're an adult, we have slightly different questions than if you're a child. And over time, as I said, we have longitudinal information. We also have a small token of appreciation in terms of completing these, and these are in the form of an electronic gift certificate to use at Amazon. And we hope that is something in terms of something you can do fun with your family or with your child. In doing this, there are individual measures that we use that are what we call standardized measures. I realize these are not all perfect and they're not absolutely sort of tailored to OCNDS. I'll say that the reason we've used these is because these are standardized measures used in the field, and in particular, the FDA, the EMA know how to think about these measures. And so as we plan for clinical trials, it's important to speak the same language that they speak and use data instruments that they're willing to accept as signs that there may be progress or maybe change with a medication or with a treatment. So I fully realize nothing is perfect in terms of what we do. We're working to make better measures, but these are the reasoning in terms of why we do what we do. We have tried to tailor these to signs and symptoms of challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis. And like I said, I think we've picked the best measures that are currently available to do that. As we do this, we try wherever possible to provide back information to you specifically about your child or family member. We do this in the form of personalized reports for as many of the measures as we can, so that you've got information you can take back to your doctor, to your therapist, to your child's teacher, that you can see for yourself. So we try and make this something that you are also becoming more educated, aware, informed as you're going along this journey. We also try and do this so that you can see collectively across the community what it is that we're seeing. And so we have these, we call them snapshots, but summaries in terms of what we're seeing across individuals. That's part of what I'm doing today. And again, this will be posted. This is an enduring recording that you'll be able to come back to or share the link with others. As we do this, we also have this as de-identified information. So in other words, your name, your location, your date of birth, no identifying information is shared with researchers, but we are disseminating this very widely. And I'll say that we have already had collectively across Simons Searchlight, not just for OCNDS, but across Simons Searchlight, over 800 researchers accessing this information, and 6 of them specifically focused on OCNDS, others that are including OCNDS across other conditions as well. And if you're a researcher, again, this is freely available, and on the lower right, you can see where you can reach out to be able to get access to those research resources, or write in if you have any questions. In addition, for certain individuals who are able to, we collect a blood sample. This is much easier to do in the United States, I'll say, at least for right now. In doing this, we can set it up so that you can go in the United States to a Quest Diagnostic Laboratories, have a blood sample collected, shipped back in centrally to Simons Searchlight. That sample can be used either for iPSCs, induced pluripotential stem cells that we make, or for research resources for other researchers to use, whether it be for making these induced pluripotential stem cells, whether it be for biomarkers for future clinical trials, whether it be for other cell lines for experiments they might have. But again, all of this covered by the funding from Simons Searchlight, nothing in terms of funding required from your group or from the families. As I said, in terms of how we use the blood sample, I know this sounds a little bit wild, but from the blood sample that you can provide, we can make cells that can be eventually be made into things that are like brain cells. We first make these into something called induced pluripotential stem cells. And even though they start as blood cells, it kind of turns them back in time to what it was like when they were not blood cells, when they were have the ability to be made into many different cell types in the body. Researchers, and in some cases, we can have researchers make these into things that are like neurons. And from those, they can be grown up in the laboratory into even making little mini brains called organoids. And from this, they can test many different things in a dish to be able to understand the biology, and in some cases, even do early stage treatment studies before they go into a living either mouse or person. And so these end up being very important to be able to understand the biology and potentially develop treatment. As I said, these can be used mostly to be able to make brain cells. They can, in theory, be used to make liver cells, heart cells, other cells as well. But as I'll be getting into, the most important ones for OCNDS are really brain cells in terms of thinking about this. And again, it's a good way to be able to essentially have other people work for you, have scientists be able to contribute towards your child, your family, as well as your condition. We also have something called Research Match, and from this, we're able to have researchers connect with you for research studies that you might want to volunteer to do. This can either be specific to OCNDS or can be more generalizable to neurogenetic conditions. These can be developing better, as I said, outcome measures, understanding particular issues like sleep or epilepsy or growth. But it's a way for you to be able to take it or leave it. You can volunteer when those invitations come, volunteer to be part of those researcher studies or not. There's no obligation, but it opens you up to more research opportunities. So let me now go specifically into the data from OCNDS and an update from the Simons Registry. Within this, there are 127 of you who have signed up online to Simons Searchlight. Of that, a subset of you have gone to the step of submitting your genetic test report. And from that, as I said, we have genetic counselors review that for eligibility. And from that, a little under 100 of you, 92 to be precise, have started filling out surveys, and 79 of you have filled out the medical history in particular. With that, a subset of you have continued onward to provide longitudinal data. Of course, we hope that everyone who starts ultimately participates, but we know this is a investment in terms of time, and we know you're busy, but certainly give us feedback if there are things we can do to make it easier. We have genetic counselors who are going through and trying to resolve any questions in the data. So you may see an email from us occasionally trying to clarify your response to something. And that's because we're working every single day to be able to make sure the data are high quality and usable by researchers. We take this very seriously. For 24 of you, you've provided those blood samples we talked about. And as I said, we continue long-term to update the data every year. This is information about the genetic variant specifically in CSNK2A1. It may look like gobbledygook, but within this is a stick figure of the gene and what I call a lollipop plot. The numbers, so this is, as I said, the stick figure. You'll see the distribution of the variants in the gene actually are quite important. You'll see that they cluster. They're not evenly spaced throughout the gene, but there tend to be relevant domains of the gene where we think is a lot of where the business end of the action of the gene is. And in particular, diddles around that tend to cause symptoms. You'll also see above this are the individual, largely what we call missense variants or single amino acid substitutions. It's not so important, but if you did look up your genetic test report, you should be able to match that on this map to others. And importantly, what I'm trying to show here is that the numbers after these amino acid substitutions or these genetic variants show how many individuals have that same variant. So as an example, at this position, at position 198, this is actually our most frequent position that we see, and there are 27 individuals who are unrelated, by the way. So this is not because you're long lost cousins. These are independent individuals from around the world who have the same exact genetic variant. In addition, there are other what we call recurrent variants at position 180, position 160. And in some cases, we have the same position but a different amino acid substitution. So for instance, at position 47, 2 different amino acid substitutions. At position 50, 3 different amino acid substitutions. And I won't go into it today, but from some of the scientists, this is in particular interesting and important. I will say that there are a few of you who may not see your genetic variants on this particular schematic, and that's because there are a few of you, 8 in particular, that have variants of uncertain significance, so-called VUS. For those individuals, we're not 100% certain that these are actually cause and effect of the symptoms, and so for the sake of being conservative for the scientists who might do experiments based on this, I have not shown those here, but those are available through the data distribution. Also not shown here, although included again in the data distribution and shown on the upper left, are a few other different types of variants. So we do have some what are called frame shift or nonsense variants. We do have some deletions of the entire gene, and we do have some splice site variants. And so for those of you that are interested, you can certainly reach out to the collections email or email me, and I'm happy to give you more detail in terms of that. In going through, as I said, we do have individuals, 24 of whom have supplied blood samples. Within that, we have a total of 29 samples, 9 of whom have been made, or 9 of which have been made into induced pluripotential stem cells. Within this, we also have we call them cell lines, but they can be used by other researchers. So if this resource is helpful, this slide is mainly for the research community. Again, for the researchers largely, this is just an inventory of the induced pluripotential stem cells that have been made and can be, again, obtained through Safari Base. The only charge for this is a nominal processing shipping fee, but otherwise, to make these particular cell lines cost many thousands of dollars. And so this was an incredibly generous way of the Simons Foundation is supporting our work here. So just to jump in, this data that I'm going to show you is based on individuals who have pathogenic or likely pathogenic genetic variants. In other words, not those variants of uncertain significance, just to make sure the data, we were very, very confident of the results I'm going to give you. This is showing the distribution by age of individuals for whom I'm going to report, and there are 68 of you here. This is age in bins on the x-axis, so individuals birth to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and then these are the number of individuals on the y-axis. The important point that I want to make is the majority of individuals are less than 10 years of age who are reported here, so still young children. We're just starting to get into individuals who are adolescents and going through puberty, and just barely starting to get individuals who are young adults. You'll notice that we don't have individuals, for instance, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and so I still think we have things to learn about challenges later on in life. It's not to say that I don't think those individuals are there, so I don't think you die when you're 35 of this condition. Let me be very clear. I don't think this is, something that is necessarily that people aren't out there, but simply that they're not accessing genetic testing. And we see approximately the same number of females and males. Overall, the take-home point is that this is mostly about the brain and behavior. I don't think this will surprise you. Also, so far, as I said, this continues to be one where individuals are gaining skills over time rather than losing skills. In other words, this is not, as far as we know so far, a regressive disorder or a degenerative disorder. I realize that many people do sometimes get stuck and stagnate. They may also have difficulty achieving, really solidly achieving skills. And so it may feel like day to day they lose some abilities. But again, for the most part, this is, as I'll show you later, positive progress, slow but positive progress. The types of symptoms that we see are related to brain function with cognition, learning, being able to communicate effectively, receptive language or understanding much better than expressive language. So I do think one of our opportunities is to think about better ways of augmenting and supporting expressive language. Many individuals have behavioral issues in some way. These can be labeled for different individuals differently. Autism is quite common in about a quarter of individuals, but also issues related to anxiety and attention can be an issue. All of these can act together to make challenging education more challenging and school-based learning more challenging. And so these are things that I know many of you have individual education plans to be able to address. Across the nervous system generally, we think of it as mostly being centrally in the brain. And in this can be problems related to muscle tone that I think are the brain's effect on the muscle. So I don't think this is a muscular dystrophy per se, but I do think it's the brain in terms of controlling muscle tone. There are also can be issues in terms of coordinating movement, just to be individuals who may appear to be may have problems in terms of just not being so coordinated, being clumsy, having difficult in terms of learning how to move their body or where their body is in space. Problems also when we think about their mouth, their tongue, their teeth, their lips, and coordinating that with speech, similar sort of issues that we see. Individuals can also have problems with smaller head size or microcephaly. Oftentimes in the pediatrician's office, we'll measure head circumference, and so you can see that. And I don't want you to get alarmed by that. Those are the major features that we see. I'll get to vision in a second. There are a very small number of individuals who have been described as having cortical visual impairment, and there are connections obviously between the eye and the brain, but I will say that the eyes are an especially important area to focus on. As another neurological manifestation, I do want you to be aware of seizures. The majority of individuals do not have seizures, but an important minority, 28%, do have seizures. These can be involved in terms of tonic-clonic seizures or grand mal seizures. They can also be more subtle in terms of just looking like kids are spacing out for a brief period of time, and we call those petit mal seizures. Important, if your child has not had an EEG or an electroencephalogram, to have that and have seizures thoroughly evaluated. And if there's anything that looks like concerning for seizures to you, um, take notes on it. If you can, take a video of it, show your doctor, whether it's your pediatrician, your neurologist, but what you're seeing that's concerning to you. And they may do either a spot EEG or even a 24-hour EEG. But important to know this because seizures are treatable, and untreated seizures can cause other problems in terms of the brain. In terms of when this happens, I don't think we know entirely the life course, but it can happen very early from infancy, but also we've seen it happening later on, even in adolescence. And I don't yet know what the upper limit may be, but most individuals are having their first seizure during toddler years. So again, if your child is already 7, 8 years old and not having seizures, that's good news. But I will say continue to watch because there can be seizures even later than that. Individuals are often, but not always, taking medication for their seizures. This is not what I'd say is something where seizures or epilepsy dominates things for the most part. So again, these tend to be more treatable as opposed to some other conditions where it's seizures, seizures, seizures all the time in a good way. I don't think that's what we are for this condition. In terms of other medical issues outside the brain, there are a few. I do want to say that they're not overwhelming in a good way. Most of the individuals are not in and out of the hospital. They're not severely debilitated, but there are some issues I want you to be aware of. Number one is that gastrointestinal issues are quite common. So this goes the full range of everything from diarrhea to constipation, and even both in one day for some individuals. The brain gut connection is real, and there are nerves that go from the brain to the intestine that determine motility or how things move along in terms of the intestinal tract. Many individuals, many families have learned to deal with this with some common medications for reflux or constipation, as well as dietary interventions and physical activity. Just physically moving the body also helps move things inside the body as well. And so a combination of getting into just the right balance in terms of diet that is right. And for different individuals, that's different things. And it's a little bit of trial and error. But those are some hopefully relatively straightforward solutions once you find that balance for your child. Another common issue is in terms of growth. Individuals tend to be shorter, not necessarily teeny tiny, but shorter obvious than sometimes their siblings or their predicted height based on their parents. That is fundamentally part of OCNDS. I don't think it's going to, for at least the vast majority of people, due to growth hormone deficiency or other problematic issues. And again, if this is relatively mild, it's more likely that it's just part of the OCNDS. As we look at growth, I try and balance weight to be comparable to height. So in other words, you don't want someone who's too skinny, you don't want someone who's overweight, and being able to look at weight for height is a good way for pediatricians to assess growth. Another common issue, as I mentioned, is vision. I'll get to that in a second. This is important because literally this is the way individuals are seeing the world. We don't want them to be blurry in seeing this. We want them to be safe. We want them to be able to learn. We want them to be able to connect with other people socially by seeing the worlds around them and others around them accurately. So bottom line, get your eyes checked out because there are many treatable things for that. As I said, there are also some other issues. The surgeries have been minor issues, so not major surgeries for most people. Might be hearing, rather ear tubes or adenoidectomies, tonsillectomies, but they have, for the most part, not been major surgeries. We talked about seizures. In terms of genital, there have been things like undescended testicles, not major issues. Heart issues have again been relatively minor issues, sometimes a heart murmur. Um, Autoimmune issues have sometimes not been proven to be exactly what they are, but people have worried about chronic fatigue that related to just being tired, sometimes issues in terms of hypotonia and endurance, but those are some of the common issues that come up. And then I'll get a little bit more into orthopedic issues, but I'll just highlight scoliosis or curvature of the spine. So going through a few of these issues in a little more detail, as I was saying, short stature has been quite common. Many people endorsed also failure to thrive, and really what that has been is pretty comparable to short stature. In other words, individuals may be growing not necessarily below the third percentile, but growing less than oftentimes the 25th percentile or less than the 10th percentile. Again, I just want to set expectations. You're not overly concerned about this. Um, Individuals, I think for the most part, don't need to have growth hormone for this. And in fact, I don't think growth hormone is going to do anything major in terms of growth. And that really has been the major endocrine issue that we've been seeing. For vision, just to drill down on that a little bit more, and this may help your eye doctors to be able to help you. There have been issues with astigmatism, sometimes strabismus or a lazy eye or crossed eye, or issues that glasses can help in terms of being nearsighted or farsighted. So within all of these things, I do think it's important in terms of getting the eyes checked out and continuing to make sure that you see the doctor usually on an annual basis if there is an issue, because the prescription may change and you may need to get updates on that to be able to obviously keep seeing the world clearly. As I said, in terms of bone issues or orthopedic issues, the children are still young, so this percentage may increase, but scoliosis we're seeing in a little less than 10% of individuals. That's curvature of the spine, and it's especially important during adolescence when individuals are going through a growth spurt, because there may be even more curvature of the spine at that point. Very easy to check for in the pediatrician's office, looking at the spine, making sure everything looks nice and lined up, and oftentimes, if there's a problem, would go to an orthopedic doctor, not necessarily for surgery. And let me be clear, most people are not requiring surgery, but things that may be helpful in terms of either a brace or just monitoring to make sure it doesn't progress too much. And again, the children are young for the most part, so I don't feel like we fully understand this yet. There have been some other problems, things that individuals may have had at birth. They may not have been recognized at birth, but bones in the back or so-called vertebrae, there can be actually structural differences, and that may predispose to the scoliosis. Rare, but we've seen it. Or there may be issues with the hips, and that's something that longer term, it's important to know, because that can lead to orthopedic issues in the future. In other words, maybe much farther in the future, but can lead to problems just like adults can have hip problems. This can be a predisposition to that as well. Some of the other things, just so you know, these technical terms, pectus excavatum or carinatum is with the chest wall and the ribs in the chest and either being pooched in or out. Again, usually not requiring surgery, but something just to keep an eye on to make sure it's not causing problems with breathing or with the lungs. I'm listing for you the medications that individuals are using, because that to me gives you some sense of how serious these conditions are. If they go to the point of needing medication, parents are taking it seriously. And within this, I'll also say that I don't think we've identified the magic bullet in terms of things that are, just perfectly making this all go away. Hopefully this looks like what I've been saying already so far in terms of the issues. Gastrointestinal issues, the most common, and a third of individuals taking medication for that. After that, it's all related really in terms of the brain and behavior. So whether it's related to epilepsy, as I said, problems with sleep are definitely an issue. And I know for some of you can be a really significant issue. As an individual in your family has disrupted sleep, it keeps everyone up, and getting a good night's sleep, very important in terms of just being your best, feeling your best, being able to do your best. And for those of you who are working parents, I know it puts a lot of pressure on you in terms of performance at work as well. So that is an area of priority for us as we're trying to think through ways of addressing that. Other issues also involving attention, and that being important in terms of focusing at school, and going forward in the future, also some other behavioral issues that I think may start becoming more apparent in adolescence as well, and for a small number of people taking antidepressants for that. I list this here for those people who are taking epilepsy or with epilepsy rather. The medications that have been at least endorsed by families as being potentially helpful are shown here. These are pretty standard medications for epilepsy. And so in a good way, I think many individuals have been able to get those seizures under control. So I'm going to wrap up in terms of the development. We use a standard scale called the Vineland Adaptive Behavioral Scale, and I'm going to show you some information in different domains or different areas from the Vineland. This is based on 41 individuals, and I'm showing on the x-axis here the age in years of those individuals. Each person shown here is a dot, and these are different individuals at different ages. So this is not the same person over time, but I'm trying to show you here that individuals are gaining skills over time. And so this line here is meant to show you if we took the data from everyone together and assume that they were representing each other because they all have OCNDS, how are they developing over time? And so it looks like, as you see, individuals are gaining skills over time. It's certainly taking longer for them to achieve these skills, but they are gaining skills over time. To give you a sense of what these scores look like and what that level of function means, this lower dashed line would be, for instance, ability to express themselves using single words. So you can see that over time, individuals are gaining that ability, not necessarily as young children, young toddlers, but they are gaining this oftentimes by going to kindergarten and school age, not 100%. And they're progressing as they're getting older. Their language is coming in, and so they can talk in phrases and full sentences and be able to tell you about an event with this dashed line up here. And so when is that starting to happen? Again, in terms of school age, 6 to 10, when that's starting to come in. But individuals are gaining those skills over time. And again, these individuals represented up here who have that skill, for instance, at 17, it's not to say that they gained that skill at 17, but when we talked to them at 17, they had that skill. This is now an important area for independence, that of personal care skills. And again, this is shown in the same way, looking at age on the x-axis, and then look at functional age on the y-axis. Then these are a couple examples. The dashed line on the bottom, ability to feed with a utensil, so not just fingers, but using a fork or spoon. And you can see that individuals are gaining that skill sometimes in sort of school age, again, younger school age, ability to dress themselves independently. Many individuals are gaining that skill as well, but it's taking some more time. So as you're thinking about with your therapist at home, how to challenge your child, how to challenge your loved one, things to be able to do, I do think they have ability. It takes a lot of patience, and I know sometimes it takes more patience than you may feel like you've got time or energy for. But I think they can do many things if we do help them and have their therapist help them in terms of some of these fine motor skills, and again, try to support them in doing this at home. This is now thinking about social skills. And remember that I said that a quarter of individuals have autism. And so we focused on some of those things that are related to some of those interpersonal connection skills. And I'd say we have some more challenges here. So, in particular, making eye contact is one thing we use in terms of assessing social interactions. And you can see that that can be more challenging, and well as when it comes to this upper level here, chooses good friends or has really social connections. You'll see that many individuals are not connecting in that deeper way. And I've seen this myself. there's a number of reasons of that. It's quite hard, but there some individuals have, and again, there is a positive trajectory in this. So don't give up. It takes a lot of a special attention to this communities to be able to be inclusive. But it is important, I think, in terms of individuals towards independence and to be able to have those connections in their community. When we think about gross motor skills, these are things like running, jumping, skipping, hopping. And again, individuals gain skills over time. Many individuals gain quite a few skills. So I think this is an area of strength for many individuals. People really are walking independently. So I think you should set that as an expectation. Individuals are able to do more complex motor movements like hopping and jumping. But this takes some time in terms of coordination to be able to do that. But this is in terms of enabling independence, I think a good thing. Individuals really can be able to be more independent in terms of their body movement and should be able, from a mobility point of view, be able to get around. The last thing I'm going to talk about is something we call the child behavior checklist in terms of different areas that they may have behavioral issues with. These change over the life course, and so there's one measure for younger children, one for older children. And I know you've all seen this, but there are issues in terms of just frustration because they can't do what they want to be able to do, difficulty being patient with this. And so all of this, again, repetition is important, patience, both with you. There are other therapists that are working with them. And with this, there is some reluctance in terms of new things, anxiety that comes up, and just being off your game when those new things do come up. So being able to get in a routine that feels comfortable and knowing what to expect. For older individuals, some of the same issues in terms of distraction, needing attention, sometimes repetitive behaviors, and really fixating on certain things, either certain videos, certain objects, certain toys, things that also I think make them feel comfortable in terms of what to expect and just making life predictable. So those are things that you'll often see. So just to summarize everything, hopefully, there are no surprises from today. I think many of you have already seen these challenges, and it may feel that you can just understand this better and feel like you're not alone, that what you're seeing is not in your head. We're seeing it across many different families. And as I said, some reassurance that I do think with good therapists, there are ways to be able to improve things, but there are clearly issues for the future, including sleep and some of these behaviors. So just finally, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our coordinators at simonssearchlight.org. Thanks very much.